Welcome to the Sable Singularity, a space where storytelling, technology, games, and systems collide on purpose. This is where I build out loud, learn in public, and document the messy, magical process of becoming. If you're a creative, a builder, a gamer, or just a curious mind, pull up a chair or a rocket ship. Let's surf the singularity together. Hey y'all, this is Kobe R. Rice, storyteller, full stack engineer, game designer, and tech founder. And welcome back to the Sable Singularity podcast. This is episode/log number, not 2, 3. I promise I can count, and I promise I'm going to get that intro down pat. So it's been a couple of weeks, and I haven't really spoken to you guys since I think January 11th. And it is now today, Sunday, February 1st. And that's because unfortunately, there was a lot going on this month. Specifically, I fell ill, then folks in my family fell ill, then my child fell ill. So it was like a 2-week insane cycle of just unfortunate events, a series of unfortunate events. So there were a lot of things that had to take a back burner to my self-care. And we're going to talk about that actually, not as like a sort of weird therapy session or, online journal session. Not that that's weird, but it's just not what it's going to be today per se. But I learned a lot in those 2 weeks where I was forced to just stop and take care of myself and also take care of others. And it applies directly to how I live my life as both an artist and an engineer. And I thought to myself, how was I able to stop, slow down, and live life and take care of myself while also turning that hiatus into a set of productivity tools that work for me as an engineer? And I came up with 4 specific tools that I myself used, whether consciously or subconsciously, to maintain my productivity, but also while prioritizing, not in a superficial way, but an actual real grounded way, prioritizing my self-care, meaning getting more sleep, drinking more water, drinking tea, broth, taking my medicine, like just tuning out from the world, just literally giving my body time to rest. So we're going to talk about that today because I do think that these 4 productivity tools are the most underrated productivity tools for engineers today. And let's talk about it. So, what are the 4 productivity tools? Like the 4, well, they're not really infinity stones of engineering and productivity, but they were my infinity stones this week. But what are the 4 most underrated productivity tools? I'll tell you straight up. Number 1, boundaries. Very important. We're going to talk about that in a second. Number 2, self-care. And not in a woo-woo way, in an actual actionable, real way. So we'll get into that as well. Number 3, improv/improvisation. That's really important. And then number 4, this might be a term that many of you engineers are already familiar with, that I have become recently familiar with, and that I'm becoming more familiar with. And that tool is refactoring. All right. So let's jump into it. Let's start with productivity tool number 1, which are boundaries. And I'm actually going to be looking back and forth. I did take like a lot of notes on this, and typically I do like to free talk, but I want these podcasts to feel more organized, and I just want to make sure that I'm giving you guys info as succinctly as possible, but that's also impactful. All right, so productivity tool number 1, boundaries. So why are boundaries important? Number 1, if your boundaries are unclear, then that's automatically going to lead to your capacity overload, right? You have to know yourself, know thyself, right? Know what you're able to do, know what you're willing to do, know what you're able to transform from a goal into a daily habit, and also know what are the asks in your life coming from other people, other things, other places that are the most likely to throw you off your own track, right? What are those things? And unless we have the answers to those questions and we have unclear boundaries in place of those answers, our capacity is going to be severely overloaded. And we're going to have overload without any appropriate resourcing, no appropriate time or time management, no appropriate compensation, which is very important, especially to me. And you will not have any accommodation to even help you meet these new goals, asks, or opportunities that are being thrown your way, right? Um, Unclear boundaries can also really impact your image management. And this is especially important. And I'm just going to be very clear and straightforward with this for women in STEM and people of color in STEM. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. So, boundaries make people very uncomfortable, right? I'm very comfortable with boundaries because you only get one life to live. Time is the one resource that we cannot ever get back. So, whenever somebody's asking you to give up some of your time, effort and energy and money, yes, are important to guard, but your time is the only thing you will lose and never get back. So when somebody's asking me to give up some of my time or a lot of my time, that is a very serious ask. It is a depletion of a resource that I cannot get back. So I'm very comfortable with boundaries. I've become comfortable with boundaries, and it's been a journey, but I'm finally there, right? But for those of you who are not cozy with boundaries, you might think of boundaries as like this weird, scary fence, right? That's going to piss people off, right? Because a lot of others don't like boundaries. And we as human beings tend to want to be at equilibrium with others. We want to get along, we want to be accepted, we want to be liked, or at least left alone, and not bothered and things of that nature. So for a lot of us, boundaries might feel as though we are the ones being antisocial, isolationist, insular, and that we're not team players, and that's going to affect how people see us and how they treat us, right? I don't see boundaries as a big scary fence that's going to piss other people off. Not that I particularly care, but still, for those of you who do, that do care about that, it's not a big scary fence. It's more so a collection of requirements that you personally have to be fulfilled before you can healthily and productively engage with something. All right. So I'll say that again. It's not a fence, although it is low key kind of a fence. Boundaries are more a collection of requirements that need to be fulfilled for you to your satisfaction and to your liking before you can healthily and productively engage with any ask, any opportunity, any drain on your time or resources. So let me tell you let me tell you about a boundary that I had to enforce recently that, probably maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, I would have felt very uncomfortable enforcing, but nowadays I felt very comfortable enforcing. And it was a boundary around a specific opportunity that was presented to me in a professional setting. So I was asked if I might be able to take 3 days, right, out of a week in order to serve as an assistant at a particular professional event, right? And the assistant or the assisting was going to be more in lines of like setup, cleanup, decorating, things of that nature, from what I could surmise, what I could tell from how it was being described, right? But there were a couple of things that I had to really reflect on before I gave a response. And the first thing I do when I'm being asked something, right? Asked to do something, asked to give up my time for something, is that I say, let me get back to you in 48 hours, right? And the reason why, and that's actually a recent addition that I've thrown into my boundary um, crock pot, so to speak, right? It's a tool that I use. And that's a recent addition, like meaning like in the past month, I've recently added that. The reason why I tell people nowadays to give me 48 hours is because I want to make sure that I properly reflect on the ask or opportunity and that I can align myself with what I can do, what I'm willing to do, what I'm excited to do, and what's going to be impactful, and so that I can also take a minute to challenge any rigidity that I might have personally developed as an individual over the past few years. Right? I have to go through that process of reflection before I give a response. Usually, my gut response is the right response, but then as someone who's committed to her own growth, I want to make sure that my gut response is not just grounded in continued comfort and fear, or just me being a curmudgeon, right? Because we can get very comfortable with how we've set our lives up. And I'm very comfortable with how I've set up my life. But sometimes the comfort can um, withhold you from opportunities that are going to be impactful, right? So you really should take that time to really reflect, is this something that I'm truly not interested in or not excited about, or that it's not impactful? Or would this really move me forward in a way that I want, but I'm just more interested in cozying up in a blanket right now because that's my comfort zone? Those are questions that are important for me to answer. And you notice as I'm talking about how I enforce my boundaries, all of it is about me, me, me. We'll get to the other person or the other entities in a second. But the first step I do is I put a pin in it. I say, let's go back, let's revisit this in 48 hours. It also prevents you from giving an emotional response. And there's nothing wrong with emotion, just FYI. Nothing wrong with emotion, nothing wrong with intuition. But sometimes our emotion shoots off faster than like our logical brains, when oftentimes they're meant to work in tandem, right? You feel something, and then your brain is supposed to take that feeling and put it into a context to give you feedback as to why you're feeling this way. And it actually gives you more information when you use these two things together. So that's number one. Put a pin in it, 48 hours, right? The second thing that I do, and this is how I maintain my own productivity, is that I ask myself, if it's being presented as an opportunity, this is an opportunity for what? And then just let the question hang. And you can either say this out loud or you can say this to yourself internally in your 48-hour cool off period. This is being presented as an opportunity, but for what? And to what end? And if you can't cleanly answer that question and you're already not inclined to engage with that opportunity, it's probably time to reinforce the boundary and say no. Okay? So in this particular situation where I was being asked to assist, it's a seemingly relatively innocuous ask, right? But we're going to break down in many ways why, from my perspective, it's not an innocuous ask. And this doesn't assume poor intent or malice or anything like that. It assumes nothing except for how I am situated in the world. So the one thing that I had to reflect on was the who, what, where, when, why, and how. The event is about an hour away from me by car and about 3 hours away from me by public transportation. Round trip, that's anywhere between 2 to 6 hours, just flat out of my day. One of those options, as you can tell, is damn near a whole work day on top of the 8 hours I'd be expected to put in at the event, right? So if I wanted to do the 2 hour round trip, that's obviously more convenient. That's more reasonable. That's, in terms of like commute and things of that nature, something that is doable. However, financially, that costs about $150 per trip. I don't drive. I don't have a car. So I don't really ever really need to use one. I'm a New Yorker, by the way, FYI. So like, give me some grace. But when I have to make long distance trips like that, I usually will take an Uber or a Lyft, or I'll do like part of the way public transportation and then the rest of the way Uber Lyft. And so that is a hefty fee to pay just off the rip to shorten and just make easier that commute. That's $150, but that's only for the first day. Then we have the other 2 days. So there's 3 days total, $150 per day. That's $450 just out of pocket financially. If I didn't want to take the trip in that way and I wanted to do public transportation, that is a 6 hour round trip for 3 days. That is 18 hours. I'm literally at that point working a part-time job on top of the full-time ask for that event, right? 18 hours of traveling just to save $500. Already, you can see your girl is doing the math and is like, this doesn't sound like something that I might want to do. Yet and still, I'm thinking about it, right? But then I get to the opportunity part where I'm asking myself, is this an opportunity truly? And what is it an opportunity for? Realistically, when I'm at the event, if I'm focused on and engrossed in trying to help the team make that event a success, whoever's on the team and whoever's there, which I have no information on, it could have just been me and another person or me and a whole squad. I don't know, but it was a pretty big event. So that alone, not even having that information, how long am I working? What am I doing specifically with whom? Just a lot of information that I was lacking. And would I be able to actually do anything that would advance me financially, professionally, developmentally, mentally, just in my mindset, emotionally, physically? And the more that I cycled through these questions, the harder it was to come up with a tangible ROI. And unfortunately, being that we live in a capitalist society and I have been forced into a capitalist mindset, this is not an excuse, this is just reality, right? To survive capitalism, you have to, in my opinion, at least think like a capitalist. You don't have to become one, but you should think like one so you can at least dodge them and bob and weave, like Neo in the Matrix, right? As a result, the fewer positive impacts to my ROI, the less likely the chance of me engaging in an opportunity or fulfilling an ask. And it doesn't mean that ROI is specifically financial. Like I said, it can be financial, professional, emotional, mental, social, okay, developmental, intellectual, whatever you define as being impactful and important and an investment to you. If the ask or the opportunity is not multiplying that investment, then it has a very low ROI and it's an opportunity or an ask that you should decline or jettison, in my personal opinion. So, just to recap briefly, when you're being asked to do something, doesn't matter in what situation, ask yourself number one, just internally, this is an opportunity for what? That's number one. Number two, what is the return on investment? Number three, let's put a pin in it for 48 hours, right? That's the part that you say. The parts that you think are start with number one and number two. But I'm going to give you some more questions to ask yourself. And then I'm going to get into how setting these boundaries and asking these questions become a productivity tool, right? I gave you some numbers and some time commitments and some financial commitments that this event would have forced me to make earlier in this conversation. And we're going to come back to that in a second. So if you're having trouble asking yourself the right questions about whether or not you should take on an ask or an opportunity, never fear. I have given you a bunch of questions, or I'm going to give you a bunch of questions you can ask yourself, divided into certain categories. Okay. So the first set of questions fall under the category of desire and alignment. Ask yourself, number one, do I even want to do this? Like, am I amped? Am I excited, curious, energized? Am I literally bouncing on the balls of my feet, right? To get into this opportunity? Like, do I care about these things? Like, am I invested? That's the first question. Are you excited? If not, sis, don't do it. you know? Number two, would I still want to do this if there were no external reward or recognition? That's really important. A lot of people will ask you, what would you do in life that you would do for free? When they're asking you about your career and things you want to do as a job or, as a vocation. How you find out what you're passionate about is thinking about, number one, what you would do for free, because it doesn't feel like work? Number two, what would you do that doesn't feel like work? And number three, how can you become better at that thing so that you can do it as a full-time thing, be passionate and excited about it, but then also be paid and be able to support yourself, right? So same questions apply here. Would you want to do this if there were no external reward or recognition? Number three, does this align with who I'm trying to become this year, or does it align with who I used to be? Are you saying yes because you want to grow, or are you saying yes out of habit? Okay, so those are the three questions that you should ask yourself about your boundaries under the desire and alignment category. The second category of questions are my favorite topic, return on investment, ROI. Okay, what's the real ROI? Money, promotion, visibility, skill development, meaningful impact. Which one specifically? Okay, is the ROI explicit or implied? Okay, so are you actually getting a check in your hands or in your account? Are you actually getting to put a line, an impactful, meaningful, grounding line that improves your credibility on your resume or on LinkedIn that people are going to take seriously by doing this opportunity? Okay, are these explicit ROIs, or are you jumping the gun, right? Is anyone actually promising you anything, or are you filling in the blanks with hope? Okay, because hope is beautiful. It's a great engine for you to keep moving forward and pushing yourself forward. But along with hope, you do want to have some kind of outcomes that you can personally benefit from. And then, most importantly, is the ROI, if there is ROI, which is great, is it appropriate for the level of effort that's being asked? Because not all exposure is equal, and not all opportunities are actual opportunities, right? It's kind of like when those companies reach out saying, "Oh, we would love for you to intern with us, but it's going to be for free. But don't worry, you're going to get plenty of experience and exposure." Well, first of all, in terms of exposure, I'm not going to say that social media has replaced all exposure. There is definitely a lot to be said for in-person networking, making connections, making bonds, and, having mentors. So we're not going to say that social media has replaced that. However, social media has done wonders to help level the playing field in terms of building an outward online and interactive portfolio for yourself online, whether it's through video, images, writing, audio, podcast, and then you can market that and get yourself in front of plenty of audiences as well on social media outlets. So, what does exposure actually mean, right? And what is the benefit of giving your labor or your time to an external person or partner for that exposure versus investing in yourself, right? Those are questions you should be asking. The next category of questions falls under cost and capacity. Okay, so what do I mean by cost and capacity? It's sort of related to ROI, but a little bit different. Is there a true cost of saying yes? Right? We got into that with my personal example. I actually laid out for you how much it would cost me financially, or in terms of my time, which I'm very precious about because you can't get time back. So I'm either paying $500 or close to it to conserve my time and to have a reasonable, work day, or I'm adding an extra 18 hours of just travel time onto my 8-hour shifts, right? There's a true cost to that. You guys know that I'm a single mom. So it's not just time or money, but it's also if I choose to conserve money and to use time, that's costing me sleep because I have to get up early, and it's also costing me logistical um, stability because I have to then reorganize my childcare situation. She goes to school during a certain period of time. I have to be at either work, or in this case it'd be at this, event or whatever, at a certain time. And those things don't always match up. Right. So then I have to rethink my entire logistics and my schedule. Right. Um, How does it impact my family? 3 days being out of the house for, I don't know, 12 to 16 hours a day has an impact. I can't, check in with the little one as often as I would like. I like to cook dinner at home and make sure, we don't have to order out all the time. I want to make sure that, my kid is doing well and the homework is getting done. There's a real cost, right? To leaning into certain opportunities that are going to cost either extra time or extra money. These are things that I have to think about not only as a working professional, but also as a mother. All right. So, what is the true cost of saying yes? Number two, do I currently have the capacity for this? I'm looking at my notes now. Or would I have to steal from something else to make it work? And if I'm stealing, what am I stealing from? Shonda Rhimes does a great, great job of addressing this very issue. She doesn't use the word steal, obviously, but she has a book out, and I'm actually gonna take a second to like look the book up because that's how good the book is. Hold on, I think it's like The Power of Saying Yes. Book. Yes, okay. It's called The Year of Yes. How to Dance It Out, Stand in the Sun, and Be Your Own Person. The thing that she said in that book that was so powerful to me was that she said, you know, people, women specifically, are in an age where they can have it all. I know some people disagree, but I don't because I feel like I have it all personally. You can have it all, but you're not going to have it all at the same time. And that was some of the realest talk I've ever heard. She said herself that there was one year where I think Sandra Oh was gonna have her last season on Grey's Anatomy, I believe. Don't shoot me if I have this incorrect and I'm casting the wrong actors in the wrong places. But I think Sandra Oh was shooting her very last episode on her very last season of Grey's Anatomy before she moved on to bigger and better things, right? But at the same time, I believe that one of Shonda's daughters had like a beautiful dance recital that this girl had been practicing and practicing, and that Shonda committed to be at, and obviously she chose to go watch her daughter's dance recital because she couldn't do both. And the choice in that sense was kind of painful because it was important for her to honor this amazing actor, Sandra Oh, who had really just, put her foot in Grey's Anatomy and had done her thing and was wonderful to work with. But then she also had to prioritize her daughter, and she could not be at both at the same time. So in her book, she says, you're going to be really great at maybe one or a couple things, but not at everything at the same time, right? So you're gonna be killing it maybe as a TV producer and writer, and then sometimes the mommy thing is gonna fall through, and maybe you have to order in some takeout or call the nanny or whatever you have to do. And then there are times when, I'm using specifically work and motherhood because that's what a lot of women, generally tend to struggle with, unless you're childless. Um, there are times when your motherhood's going to be on point. You're wiping the tears, getting the noses blown out if there's, sniffly, like I had to do, applying medicine, loving on your kids, being there, taking them places, celebrating birthdays, and things at work are just at a bare minimum because your child requires extra of you this week and you have to show up. You're not going to be able to wear all the hats at once. Okay, and that's okay. So going back to the original point, you have to ask yourself, though, still, even though we know we're going to have to steal from certain areas to make other things work, how am I stealing? Where am I stealing? And from what am I stealing to make this work? And is it worth it? The next question under cost and capacity that you should ask yourself is, would I still say yes if this cost showed up on a credit card statement? That was a powerful one for me because I was imagining that $450 because, credit cards, this is no shade to anybody who like engages with credit cards, but unfortunately they are built to siphon your money, right? So I'm trying to move away from those as much as humanly possible and live within my means. And that means that $450 is coming out of my actual cash budget. That's like 2 weeks or maybe nowadays a week and a half of groceries. That's utility and phone bill. That's a certain percentage of my rent. Like that's money. And yeah, sometimes you don't feel like it's going to be a good investment of your money or time or energy when it shows up on that mental credit card statement, right? Because time, energy, and your health are currencies, and we're going to get into all of those things, but specifically health later in the episode. Section D, ownership and leverage questions. Now, this is really important for engineers and artists. Well, that's who I'm talking to anyway, right? Um, but this is especially important if you produce IP, intellectual property, right? And so if you're an artist and you're writing novels, painting, writing, drawing manga, shooting films, writing screenplays, teleplays, or you're an engineer building apps, building software, writing code, building LLMs, like all of that is intellectual property that you own or are leasing out or giving away to whoever is employing you, if that's applicable, right? The question you need to ask, or the questions you need to ask under this category is, will my investment in this opportunity generate any intellectual property, any leverage, or reusable work? Are you going to get any IP out of this, basically? And if not, why are we doing it? um, Also, just as importantly, who owns the output and who benefits long term? Okay. Now, when you're working for a company, obviously, your output is essentially owned by the company, if we're going to be very honest. Okay. What rather your output for the company. Sometimes, depending on the contract you sign, your output outside of the company could be owned by the company, if you're not careful, right? Like there was a huge issue as a side note. Somebody who worked at Mattel, I think it was the person who founded the Bratz line. I have to confirm this lore, but I had heard some lore about someone who worked for a doll company, a big doll company, who then went to start their own doll company. But because they had developed the dolls and the structure, the infrastructure, and everything while under the non compete clause and like that time period of their former company, that other person had to either pay the former company royalties or hand over IP or lose the IP altogether, something like that. I read the story a long time ago and I thought it was so wild. I'm pretty sure it was the Mattel Bratz situation, but don't quote me on that. But whether or not that's true, let me say allegedly so I don't get in trouble. Whether or not that alleged situation is true, that is actually a very real legal issue when you're working for software companies, telecom companies, any company that generates IP or trademark or products or toys, things of that nature. So be careful with that, okay? But still ask yourself, who owns the output? And if you don't own the output, are you still willing to put in that effort that you're being asked to put in? And then finally, if I'm giving this away, what am I getting in return that I couldn't get on my own? Okay. This goes back to the portfolio issue. If a company is asking you to do free work for them at any point, this is a company, for example, that like is not hiring you. So companies that ask you to do internships, free labor, free work, deliver free products, what are you getting out of that you couldn't give to yourself? Like if a company asked me, I'm an instructional designer, and another company came along and said, hey, you want to do an internship with us as an instructional designer? You get to design simulations and scenario based e-learnings and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting, but I can do that already. I have the skills to do that. And the same 30 hours or whatever that I'd be putting into get exposure and experience with this other company, I could just develop a portfolio piece that reflects all the similar skills and acumen that they're asking me to invest in their company. There's no real ownership there. So I really should just be taking that time and putting it into my own portfolio development, right? And I would say that to any artist and engineer. If somebody's asking you to do free work and free art, Why would you do that? I mean, you can just add to your own portfolio. They have to pay you. That's the trade-off, okay? All right. Two more categories. I know this is a really long chunk, but it's really important. It's the longest of all the four, so just bear with me, okay? Motivation and power dynamics. That's a category that of questions you should be asking yourself. Number one, and this is where you have to be really emotionally honest with yourself. It's very important, okay? Are you saying yes because you're genuinely interested? Or are you saying yes to manage someone else's emotions and response and perspective of you? Okay. Sometimes people say yes out of guilt, fear, obligation. A big one is that a lot of people are people pleasers. And these forces are not neutral forces, okay? So let's not pretend that they are. And if you are a people pleaser, I'm a former people pleaser. I promise you I am. So I understand this way better than you would expect, right? I'm just more evolved at this point to kind of balance out the needs of others with my own needs. As a former people pleaser, I understand the guilt and the fear that goes along with saying no to someone who you believe in some way, shape, or form holds power over you, because that's ultimately what people pleasing is about. If they didn't hold any power over you, why would you want to please them in any way, right? I guess the answer to that would be that your own view of your self worth is how happy you can also make others, right? So, in addition to you believing that people have power over you, you need that validation in order for you to believe that you have power over yourself. Okay, then that's real deep. We gotta go to therapy for that one. Okay, I know I did. I'm doing my work. I continue to do my work, but it's an important question to ask yourself, right? So, are you saying yes because you're interested, or are you trying to manage other emotions? Question number two under this category leads back to what I just said. What am I afraid will happen if I say no? And is that fear realistic or is it historical? Again, this leads into people, situations, entities having power over you, whether real or not real. And then finally, why does this person, the asker, right, the opportunity giver, why does their urgency outweigh my boundaries? And who taught me that? And again, without trying to delve too crazily into everything being driven by identity politics, even though it kind of is. So we're not going to pretend that they're not, but that's a whole different episode. We'll stay away from that for now. I say that because women, especially women in the professional field, have a very hard time with this, right? Where we are taught in order to survive in this world that's largely patriarchal, we have to bend and shift and carry the urgency and the priorities of others outside of ourselves, even if it makes us uncomfortable, even if we don't have time, even if it's going to crush us. We're taught that that's our job. And that seeps into our workplace. It seeps into all places. And that's something I'm asking you to examine. Even if you can't push back against it or debunk it or deconstruct it today, I still need you to look at it and just ask yourself the question. Okay? And that in itself is doing a lot of work. And then the final category, which gets into the place where a lot of people are uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable talking about this, but some people are, and they don't like to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, is image management and personal PR. And again, this is very important for women, women in STEM, women of color in STEM, and people of color in STEM as a whole, right? Now, image management, unfortunately, is very important, okay? And it's not an issue of vanity, it's more so an issue of professional risk management. The same way people will, I will say, for example, people of color will often code switch between how they speak at home, how they speak with their friends, and how they speak in the professional setting. Everybody does this to a certain extent. Okay, I want to acknowledge that we all code switch to a certain extent, but some of us in certain communities have to do it more often and more impactfully and make a larger leap on a day-to-day basis than others. I'll leave that there. But getting to the professional risk management issue, code switching goes into image management and personal PR. And these are things that we have to think about as women and women of color in STEM. So when it comes to bringing it back to the original point, whether or not an opportunity is a real opportunity, you need to ask yourself how it impacts your image and your personal PR. So some questions I want you to ask yourself, Queen, okay, Reina, all right? Number one, does my participation in this opportunity advance my professional image, my import, my gravitas, or credibility in any way? Or does it position me as support staff, as labor, as extra help, rather than being a peer, a colleague, a professional, or a leader? Are you being asked to hang balloons and cut cake? And are you asked your opinion in, big wig meetings as often as you're asked to hang balloons and cut cake? These are questions you need to ask yourself. Don't blame the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Another question. Would this opportunity be seen as a growth opportunity if someone else with your same title but a different identity were to accept it? Matter of fact, would someone else with the same title and a different identity accept it? Okay, like I said, it's time to get uncomfortable. This might be the part of the podcast you want to skip over if you want to get to the other stuff and you don't like it, but that's okay. But this is real. Ask yourself this question. Is it growth for somebody in your position, or would it subtly and kind of implicitly reinforce a lesser role? Number three, who else is being asked to do this? Are men being asked to do this? Are senior engineers being asked to do this? Are people outside of your demographic being asked to do this? Sometimes they are. And then you can kind of sit back and be like, okay, equal opportunity for everybody to cut the cake. And then also for people to review code and, approve PRs and stuff like that, right? Great. Okay, at that point, skip past this part of the podcast because you're in a great environment. But if you notice that the opportunity is not so diverse in who gets to participate, or certain opportunities are selectively assigned, that is a red flag. Okay? Just make sure you have a lens. Whatever you ask yourself, make sure the lens asks if the opportunity is bias neutral. And bias neutral, as a side note, doesn't always have to deal with your sex, gender, race, age, religion, creed, demographic. Sometimes people will ask you to do certain things that they wouldn't ask others because they have a different perception of what you can do ability wise versus what others can do. And this can be dangerous either way. If somebody thinks that you are like the ultimate superhero, superwoman, and you can do anything and everything, you're going to be asked to do anything and everything. Even when it comes to the, less interesting or, the image weird, the image weird requests, right? You're going to be asked to do everything and invited to do everything. And to a certain degree, like that's wonderful, right? But then it can also really overload your capacity. Whereas somebody who's seen as being incapable or not being as capable as others won't get asked to do anything. And that could actually really, really hurt that individual's professional development, their progress, their stature, and their status and their gravitas in the industry. So bias is not just about what you see on the external, it's about how people perceive your competence as well. Okay. And I think too, FYI, Black women in particular, and I'm going to put this in Black women in STEM, because I don't know what everybody goes through, what all of us go through, but you can be on either end of the spectrum. You can be seen as somebody who is completely incapable, right, for whatever reason, or you can be seen as someone who is absolutely 1,000% capable, and that both sides can cause a lot of stress. Okay, that's a whole nother podcast, but something to think about. All right. Three more questions, and then I'm gonna take a quick break to get a salad. Am I being asked to represent, support, assist, or be present? Or am I asking to lead? Or sorry, am I being asked to lead, decide, and build? Okay, these are very different things, especially when it comes to your image management and personal PR. And they carry very different professional signals. Okay. Next question. Would saying yes here and now make it harder for people to see me in my actual role or in my at my actual skill level or see me at my actual trajectory? And sometimes the cost here again is not really time, energy, or money, it's perception. So if you're always the person to be cutting the cake or to be bringing sweets to the office or to be cleaning up the kitchen in the office, is that how you're going to be known? Or are people going to know you for your brilliance and your strategy and your leadership and your people management skills? You have to be careful, okay? And again, unless your office space is extremely balanced and that people are being extremely proactive about debunking who's supposed to take on what role in the office, I would be very careful, especially as a woman in STEM, positioning yourself to be the office wife, respectfully, the office mom, or the office janitor. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a janitor or a wife or a mother. So for those of y'all trying to be offended, no, try again, okay? But context is everything, and that's important to know. The final question under this category that you should ask yourself before saying yes to an opportunity is, if I accept this, what story does it tell about me, intentionally or unintentionally? And most importantly, most impactfully, is that a story that I want repeated when I am not in the room? I'll set that there. And the reason why your boundaries are probably your most powerful productivity tool as an engineer is because they protect your time. They protect your energy and they protect your self-image, right? Because you need time. You need to get into the zone when you're trying to code, debug something, review code, engineer a new software product, whatever it is you're trying to do. Time is of the essence. Having just like hours of uninterrupted time when you're vibing out to some synth in the background, you have a coffee and you're just at your computer for 4 hours straight because you're vibing, that's important. And if you're off, for example, in my case, doing an event that's going to literally cram what 45 hours a 45-hour work week into 3 days, that's not the best use of my time, right? Your energy is important. How can you code? How can you be an artist? How can you paint without the energy? How can you be productive in anything without time and energy, right? And so your boundaries and asserting those boundaries are going to be a productivity tool. You're going to find that you have a lot more money in your account, you have a lot more time, and you have a lot more energy to actually funnel into the things you want to do. So that is my first productivity tool. Let's get into tool number 2. So tool number 2, productivity tool number 2, and this will go a lot faster than boundaries because as you can imagine, boundaries are very important to me, and I also think they're very important just generally as tools of self-management, self-care, self-love, and also productivity. But let's talk about self-care as a productivity tool. So you guys will hear this from me. You heard this from me probably on the past 2 podcasts. You're going to hear this from me a lot more. Self-care is hands down your number one productivity tool. Okay. Why? Because without your health, you have nothing, literally. And if I ever deign to forget that, the universe always tends to remind me. Like, again, this past January, I was knocked out for 2 whole weeks with it. Mind you, it was a relatively mild cold, but it was just so uncomfortable. I just didn't feel I could multitask in a way that was impactful or even reasonable. So I don't want to get into like what was going on, but like there's a weird clingy upper respiratory thing that's just going around. And I was just uncomfortable. I was just like, my head hurts. I'm stuffy. I'm tired. Let me just lay down. And I'm glad that I made that choice because there were a lot of things going around. Unfortunately, I and people around me caught all of them. And so if I wasn't bedridden or stuck in bed, I was helping someone else who was stuck in bed. All right. And to me, that's a productivity tool, not in the average, usual way, but more so in making sure our bodies and our relationships are intact for when it's time to get back on the horse. Right. So I was forced to slow down. I was forced to hydrate more, sleep more, just to self reflect more, ease, rather embrace ease and rest my nervous system. And if you guys know anything about me, my life, the past couple of years, or just have been listening to any of my podcasts, you'll know that these are very important tools for me, just individually. And I had had a very crazy health scare like just 2 years ago. And that was because I was not taking care of myself the way I was supposed to, right? And so self care and health and wellness have been a very important goal for me for the past couple of years. So that I can stay, on the horse, but also just like be present, be around, be interactive, be here for my child, God willing. So those are things that I think are great for your productivity. Anyone who's been sick in any capacity knows that if you're not taking care of yourself, there is no such thing as productivity, and that there is no productivity without self care. Um, is there anything else I want to say on this topic? Oh, one thing that actually kind of hit me in a sneaky way was because I had made self care, health, and wellness an actual goal on my 2026 goals list. Me taking those 2 weeks off were to focus on my self-care was literally me being productive toward that goal, those goals I had set for myself at the top of 2026. How are you going to move toward a goal if you don't take the time to focus on and invest in that goal? So even though I hadn't planned to move toward that goal in that way for the past 2 weeks, that's what happened. I ended up actually being a lot better with my hydration because I've been historically bad with that, and working actively, proactively on getting even more sleep. And those two things are daily tasks and habits I'm still trying to build. So, in an interesting, weird way, that 2 week hiatus I had to take was a really needed reset to make sure I stay or get on the goal and I stay on the goal. So, I'm still being cognizant of that. I have my little self care Finch app. There's a cute app called Finch that you should invest in. It's really cute. That gives you self care goals for every single day, and so I'm able to track how well I'm doing in each of those areas. FYI, another great health app is literally the health app if you have an iPhone. And it monitors all sorts of different things from your exercise to your sleep to your heart rate, to like anything. So definitely use it, invest in it. The sleep part of the app has gotten a recent upgrade that I love, which gives you like a sleep rating. And it actually, if you have an Apple Watch, which I do, it monitors your sleep, monitors like the actual sleep cycles, which I don't even know how it does that, but good on you, Apple, for getting that technology on point. And it tells me how well I slept the night before. I slept. Wow. It tells me how well I slept the night before. So I can then make adjustments and do better the next night. And so that is really helping me. I really want to invest in keeping my body, my spirit, my mind, my brain just as healthy for as long as I can. So that is tool number 2. Do not sleep on it, my lovely artist engineers, because it's going to be the productivity tool that allows you to be productive, not only in the short term, but most importantly for the long term. Let's get into productivity tool number 3. What's productivity tool number 3? Shockingly, it's improvisation. Okay. And I know this is something that, well, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but you hear more about improvisation when it comes to theater and stand up, right? But actually, improvisation, or if you're MacGyver or Tom Cruise in an action movie, but I digress, okay? But improvisation is actually a wonderful productivity tool. And let me explain to you why. So, during those 2 weeks that I was sick and sad that I couldn't be at my computer 12 hours a day, just typing things out or whatever, doing my thing, um, I realized, okay, I'm not able to be productive in the standard way that I like to be productive. I like to have a cozy workspace with my fantastic, little mug of tea, okay, my hoodie, and some music playing in the background or a podcast in the background while I'm doing my thing. That wasn't going to happen while I was sick. So I improvised, right? So while relaxing in bed, which I did a lot of, prior to me going to sleep or when I was wide awake and knew I wasn't going to sleep, instead of scrolling on my phone for entertainment, although I did quite a bit of that as well, I used my apps on my phone, like my notes app, my Scrivener app, things of that nature, to continue world building for the Sodom series. Again, I think I said in one of these past podcast episodes that when I'm tired and when my brain is just done and ready to shut off, writing is what I go to, especially when it comes to world building, character design, scene design. Like, it's my relaxation go to, okay? Call me crazy, but I find it very relaxing. I love it. So, when I'm in bed and I'm just like, ugh, I can't sleep, my head, I'm sneezing, lots of snot, nasty, I'm able to still use my thumbs to build, right? And I actually ended up, shockingly, designing an entire sports and athletic world for the Sodom series, which you would think, what's the big deal, right? But in this particular series, which is a dystopian thriller and sort of sci-fi noir, every single system in this series is a power system. And in Sodom, there are different gangs, different casts, different groups. And so the athletic industry is filled with a lot of coded rivalries, power dynamics. Of course, it's a criminal underworld, so there's a lot of rigging, betting, violence. Um, Throw this match or I'll break your kneecaps. And then what does that mean for the larger world of Sodom? And I realized as I'm building out this world that sports have a different flavor and meaning and impact in this particular world where I chose the sports landscape very carefully, right? So, for example, there's no baseball and there's no like American football. Not because those aren't great sports, but because they have a lot of, nowadays, they have a lot of glitz, glam, leisure, rules, regulations, flags on the play. Sodom is a world of criminals, okay? Those sports don't really survive well. So you're going to see like boxing, specifically like bare knuckle boxing, UFC, we have rugby, we've got climbing, like, and climbing in the sense of like you're in a broken dystopian city of like crumbling skyscrapers type of climbing, like street racing, like there is a whole world of athletics and sports that has its own character. And I didn't have to do anything but lay in my bed, okay, and just type on my phone. And I was just so engrossed in that. So I still was able to make progress, even though I wasn't hitting all my milestones. And we'll talk about that more in a second. For my coding, programming, and full stack engineering, when it came to improving with that, yeah, homework was still due, unfortunately. And this was the hardest part of being sick. That's always the hardest part, is doing the things that are not really negotiable when you yourself are trying to negotiate your health, right? But how did I improv? Usually, I like to engage in deep study. I have a very high standard and a very specific, particular way that I engage with my studies. I'm a nerd. I love to study. I love to learn. And when I'm learning in a formal environment, my study habits are also very formal. So that means me getting up in the morning and in the evening at my desk with my special cute pen and my binder paper and my binder, and going through every single lesson, creating a glossary, writing out detailed notes. If I see a practice problem, I'm practicing it and, trying to get it right. And then also doing like my own variations on the practice problem. Like, your girl doesn't play when it comes to education and intellectual development. But because I was not well and I wasn't able to do that for hours at a time at my desk after work or before work, I had to do something a little different. So what I did was is that I skimmed. Also, some of the smartest people who are super invested in like studying and intellectual pursuits know the power of skimming versus deep reading and when to employ either or. That's a very important skill to know. I have that skill. So I said, sis, these 2 weeks are a skimming week. Skimming, finding the most important concepts, picking out exactly what you need to know so that your time is reduced and your energy is preserved, right? And then, so I did that. And then I also made an intellectual beeline for the specific information that I needed to pass my labs for the week and to also contribute productively to the conversations and discussions online, right? And then after I did those two things, I was done for the week. Okay. I was done. And even that took quite a bit of energy. But just for, those of you who are trying to figure out maybe how you can maximize or make your study time more efficient, look at how your course is actually graded, hit the grades, and then follow up with the content and the substance. Or if you don't care about grades at all, you're cool with getting like a C, just passing, because it's important for you to make sure you grasp everything fully and perfectly before you finish things on time, then by all means do that. Do whatever is best for you. But for me, I care about the substance, I care about the deep study, and I care about my grades at the same time. So I said, all right, this week's a skimming week, intellectual beeline week, focusing on the labs and the discussion week. And then when I'm well, I will come back and do all of my deep study on the parts that I couldn't really delve so deeply into. That is how I improvise, and it works great. I still have an A in that class. And looking back on it, to be very frank, I actually retained a lot more in those past 2 weeks than I thought I would, right? It's not going to really change up my study structure, but I also realized that I still absorbed quite a bit of knowledge, and that was very encouraging for me. So I was happy about that. Another way I improved was that using the voice notes feature. Okay, we got to learn how to use technology to help us through. Okay, that's what it's there for. So when you can't type but you can talk, use the voice notes. But unfortunately, there was a point at which I also couldn't talk. That's how crazy the cold was. It was like, again, relatively mild, but just like very weird. So there were like 2 to 3 days I could not speak. My voice was just like not working. So then I had to go back to typing up my notes on my notes app. And then posting it into the discussion board. Like, so you improv and you change and you're flexible as is needed. Okay. So that's how I got through my coding and full stack engineer education for those 2 weeks with improv. For game design, okay, to be very frank with you, I had to kind of drop that for these past 2 weeks. I really needed to like rest and recuperate. I could not sit at my desk for hours at a time trying to like design and develop and prototype. But instead, what I did was is that I went to some of my favorite techies and my favorite game designers that I found so far. I'm still looking for more online, but my favorite game designers, I checked them out and I watched their content. I watched their YouTube videos of how they were designing their games, right? And so I was able to learn a lot by looking at others' processes. Okay, how do you prototype with gray boxes? I didn't know you could do that. I thought you just drop in the actual model or whatever and then you go from there. No, sis, use a gray box so you can just like get the technical stuff down. Didn't know that until I watched one influencer's channel, right? So that was great. I was able to absorb a lot of information, learn a lot, and at the same time, as a fringe benefit, I was able to support those channels with my view minutes and view hours. And because I'm all about the women's empowerment on this channel, on this podcast, I was able to support female game designers and coders and women of color who are also game designers and coders, which is very important to me because oftentimes those channels are not hitting the algorithm in the same way that other channels of other demographics are hitting. So I want to make sure I'm supporting them. So I was happy to do that. It was a double win. And even though I wasn't able to get aspects of my game design completed, I still made progress in my understanding and in my intellectual development around game design. Okay. And then finally, even though you guys know I'm a tech founder, I'm an app designer, but this is not the season for my tech and app development. So there was nothing to progress toward. So there was no guilt around that. And I was able to just like chill and do my thing. So what you'll notice with this improv, using improv as a productivity tool, it still moved the needle. I still made progress, even if I didn't hit my specific goals and milestones. And that's something that I think is important and is understated when it comes to being an artist engineer. I'm not saying the end goal is not important. I'm not saying that you shouldn't work towards a deadline or towards milestones. I'm not saying that. But I think the journey is really the only thing that we truly, truly own in this process or in this lifetime. As people, just even as just a person, the decisions I make and me taking accountability and ownership and stepping into those decisions, that is what I own. I don't always own what the end product is, right? Or what the end result is. Sometimes I do. A lot of times I do, but not always because we're in a world of multitude of variables. And I say the same thing when it comes to your journey as an artist and engineer. Progress is more important. The journey is the most important. And making tiny steps or taking tiny steps along that journey is what you can really control the most. Okay? So let's see. I think overall, team, chat, watchers, lovers, I think that the improvisation aspect or the improvisation tool really did lead to a lot of productivity. And that's especially true when I reflect on what I was actually able to get done and experience for these past 2 weeks across all four pillars of my identity, right? At the beginning of my 2 week stint, I didn't have an athletics world in my dystopian thriller series. Now I do. At the beginning of the 2 week stint, I didn't know anything about object oriented programming in Python, classes, objects, superclasses, subclasses. Now I do that and then some, right? And now I know how to program them too, right? Um, and in terms of game design, there was a lot that I just was able to passively learn from how to prototype your game, how to paper prototype versus studio prototype a game. I learned a lot about Roblox Studio specifically and how it worked and how all the components work together. I didn't know all of that 2 weeks ago. So think about that. Think not only what did I get done, but what transformation have I made with my improvisation tool at from point zero to point 10, right? For me, that was week 1 to week 3. How far did I come? What did I learn? What skills did I gain? What was I able to practice? What do I have now in my toolbox that I didn't have before? And then you'll understand how improvisation is the perfect productivity tool. Let's talk about the final tool, refactoring. Tool number 4. So when it comes to refactoring, this is the part where I acknowledge that, like, yes, the journey is important, but also we still want to make and meet our goals, right? So for those of us who are like, yeah, yes, sis, like journey, woo woo, one step at a time, one small step, one big leap for man, whatever, I don't care. I need results. This part of the podcast is for you, okay? Um, so, what does it mean to refactor, right? And how does it take us out of the woo woo progress is the only thing that matters, right? And bridges that progress with actual results? How do we put all these things together? So, first and foremost, refactoring, as you may or may not know, is an actual terminology that is used in programming by programmers, developers, coders, and engineers. Okay. And I'm going to read it out to you directly because, again, I'm using my notes and your girl is still learning. So, be patient with me. But refactoring, what is it? In programming, refactoring is the process of restructuring existing code to improve its clarity, efficiency, and maintainability without changing what the code actually does. All right, that was a mouthful. I'm going to continue. So, what refactoring is not, okay? It's not adding new features or goals. It's not changing how the program behaves or your ultimate aspirations. It's not optimizing prematurely for performance or launching things that are not ready because you want to be able to brag, okay? That's a different thing. And it's not always about starting over because I hate this, even though that's really relatable and it can be, but it doesn't have to be about that, all right? So basically, in layman's terms, refactoring is just you reorganizing your systems, reorganizing systems, expectations, your workflow so that what you're trying to achieve is just easier to achieve and maintain. And you don't have to change what you're trying to achieve or who you are in order to do that. All right. So, just in modern, layman's terms, let's say that you just want to get your house clean top to bottom, right? Maybe in your original plan, you had a 1 month, 30-day, I'm going to do 5 things every day to get this house cleaned. And I want it this specific way. And then you realize, oh snap, I don't actually have time to do that. So you refactor that entire plan and you say, you know what? Actually, I'm going to divide these chores into 2 big lists, hire a cleaning service, and just have them come in for 8 hours 1 week and then 2 weeks later, 8 hours the next week. You still got the thing done. You still got it done how you wanted it done. It's just the way that it was done, the when, the where, the who, the what was slightly different. You just changed the system, right? So I want to be clear though, because improv and refactoring can be like confused because you can ask yourself, hey, Colby, like if you're changing the way you're doing something to get it done, aren't you just improvising? Isn't that improv? Right? So it can be very confusing, right? It can make you think that improvisation and refactoring are the same thing. They're not. So I just want to be very clear. Improv and refactoring are 2 totally different things. How so? All right. So improv is just how you keep moving when the plan breaks, right? And it's also a little bit more like reactionary and in the moment. So it's kind of like your tactical in the moment adaptation. The rope that you're holding on to breaks. So, girl, in order to keep yourself from falling, you're gripping the rocks with your hands for now. Okay. For now, right? It's being flexible with the how and being flexible with, like, essentially in this example, how to cling to the mountainside. Right? But refactoring is once you're done surviving the moment with your improv, you take your original plan back to the drawing board and you redesign it so that it doesn't break the same way again, right? So this is where you do a strategic structural redesign. It's like you being more flexible with the what, where, and when. So in the mountain climbing example, you're climbing, you had an original plan, you have your climbing gear, you have your rope, and that's maybe all you have, okay? Your rope breaks and you're like, ah, but you're able to grab onto the mountain and you're hanging on for dear life and you survive because you were able to pivot in that last minute, grab on like Tom Cruise in that movie. I don't know why I'm talking about Tom Cruise so much today, but just bear with me, okay? Grabbing on, you get to the top of the mountain, and now that you're like, whew, I survived, sis. Now you can think about how to avoid falling off that mountain the next time. Maybe you have two ropes instead of one for the next climb. Maybe you have climbing spikes. Maybe you have, I don't know anything about mountain climbing or mountaineering. So, like, please just be gentle with your girl. Okay. Maybe you have stronger gear. Maybe you kick yourself out a little bit more. Maybe you have multiple anchor points, right? So, you're still climbing the mountain. You still love mountain climbing. You still have your goals as a mountain climber, but you're just better kitted out for the crazy things that might happen. Your entire structure, your entire mode of how you go about achieving your goals has been reworked to make yourself more efficient and to keep yourself on track. I hope that makes sense. So, let's talk about, since I don't climb mountains because I like being alive. Respectfully to those of you who want to climb mountains, more power to you. Let's talk about average, regular, degular ways that we refactor in our day-to-day lives, right? So in day-to-day life, we consistently redesign our plans all the time without even knowing it. And that's why, going back to my first episode, I say that humans were the original engineers before engineering was an actual thing, because we've always been refactoring, right? Let's get back to the present. So in day-to-day life, we refactor our time, right? So when we realize we don't have enough time to do something, or we need more time to do something, we rearrange our schedules, we rearrange our methodology in order to find more time, or to preserve our time, hint, hint, boundaries, okay? Or to just borrow and steal time, right? Excuse me. We also refactor our standards without refactoring our self-worth. So for example, when I was sick for those 2 weeks, a lot of things were piling up: laundry, dishes, like, ugh, like, you know what I'm saying? Just things that I typically like to keep neat and clean. I just wasn't able to do it. But when I was able to do it, I got back on it and I did my thing. At that point, my standard was making sure that I rebounded from the cold that I had, in a way that was healthy and, full, and just in a way that prioritized my self-care. I didn't allow my standards for the dishes to outweigh my personal self-care and my personal, like, just my personal thing, like my personal self. I don't know how to explain it. I'm more important than the dishes. Let's put it that way, okay? My daughter is more important than the dishes. So when she got sick, of course, it was easier to keep the house cleaner, but she still came first, right? So it's not a statement on our self-worth. It's just a statement on humanity. And it's a statement on, we have to prioritize certain things or reprioritize certain things to make sure that we are still meeting the goals of self-care, and in my case, self-care and being a good mom, okay? We also tend to refactor our effort and the distribution of our effort, right? So, for example, to go back to my original example about how I learned these past 2 weeks, I didn't stop learning. I just changed how learning happened. Deep study became targeted skimming. Perfect comprehension of the material became enough to pass my classes ethically, right? My desk work became laying in the bed phone work. My handwritten and typed notes became voice notes. Then they got refactored into typed on the phone notes. Can I talk today? I don't know. Right? So that got refactored like 2 times as opposed to one. And then like active building of like my game became passive learning, watching others and still gaining skills, right? And then we also tend to refactor the scope, like the breadth and the depth sometimes of things. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be as far reaching or as deep. We're just going to travel farther at a different pace and go deeper at a different pace, right? When I realized that my monthly goals weren't all going to happen because I was put behind by my 2 week illness, I didn't panic. There's no spiraling, no, scrapping. Oh, the whole year is just, a loss. Like, no, like, stop being dramatic, relax, breathe, woo-sa, let's just reorganize, okay? So, this actually brings me into an example that I think brings all of these productivity tools together. And I love the woo woo, so bear with me, but this is going to be actionable woo woo. I think you're going to really appreciate this example. I had to refactor a lot of things this past month, right? One of those things, in just to be very specific, was absolutely my game design sprint schedule because I was behind now by 2 weeks, right? So I said, okay, I have a 6 sprint game design schedule. I'm already behind by 1 sprint. So let me take all of my sprints, and I went over to ChatGPT in my game development folder, and I said, hey, I lost 2 weeks of progress. Please help me to rework this whole sprint into a schedule that basically refactors, right? All the things that I want to do, but just at a different pace. And if it has to be a longer development schedule, then fine. That's fine, right? I found out through ChatGPT that the original sprint schedule that I had created was already too ambitious and like too intense anyway. I was trying to get a lot done in just 12 weeks, 6 sprints, right? And so ChatGPT actually helped me break down those 6 sprints into 11 sprints. And I actually like this sprint schedule a lot better because each sprint focuses on one or a couple of particular specific features that are focused, digestible, achievable in those 2 weeks. And it's working because in the past week and a half, yay, 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 I had created a sprint 0 and sprint 0.5, which are like my preparatory sprints, and I completed them. So I'm actually ready to kick off my sprint number 1 right on schedule as of tomorrow, Monday, February 2nd. And I'm really excited about that. So refactoring really came into play when it came to me understanding how my game design could still live and I could still meet my goals. It's just, again, the when, the what, the where were different. Okay. And the lesson here, before I get into the bigger woo woo part of it, if you're waiting for that, is that if your plan only works when nothing goes wrong, it's not really a plan. And you're actually setting yourself up for failure because things will inevitably, irrevocably go wrong. That is Murphy's Law. If there is no other law that is consistently at work with its foot on our necks, it is Murphy out here Murphying. Okay? So make sure that you have a plan, but that you are flexible enough to go back into that plan and refactor it as needed. Okay. And that just means that you're admitting that that first draft wasn't a perfect draft. It was informational. It's not this sacred relic, right? That you can't change or update. Like, it's just informational. It's just like a first draft. And like all first drafts have to be written at some point, right? Or be rewritten, excuse me, at some point. You're designing for yourself, the operator, right? That you're designing for the person you actually are, the operator you actually are. And you're not trying to design for the superhero version of yourself. We all have superhero versions. I just want to be abundantly clear. But you only need the superhero version when something actually like needs to be saved, if that makes sense. For the rest of the year, when you're not out here being Superman and Clark Kent or, Bruce Wayne, Batman, etc., you can just be like a normal, regular person with a regular life. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can design for yourself as you actually are, and it's going to be okay. And refactoring allows you to remind yourself of that and to give yourself, to re-gift yourself the power of your own humanity in the midst of this crazy capitalist world that's obsessed with constant productivity. Irony, because this whole podcast is about productivity, but I'm trying to show it to you in a healthy way. Okay. And then refactoring finally essentially just means that you're letting go of your ego and you're committing yourself to consistency, self-care, and just self-acknowledgement, right? The ability to like stop erasing who you are and erasing yourself from the process and fully embracing the fact that yourself is in the process and that you're going to continue to iterate and have conversation with that evolving self while you are making progress and meeting your goals. Okay. So, what is the ultimate woo woo lesson around all of this, right? The woo woo lesson for me, and I'm going to explain to you why, I'm going to see exactly that this is amazing. So, bear with me, is that the more you are committed and consistent, but also flexible, the universe is going to continue to make space for you. Here's the example. Here's how I realized that once again for the 50 millionth time. So, once I had to refactor my game design and game development schedule, and once it became an 11-week sprint, I realized that this is going to be not a Q1 project, but a Q1 and Q2 project. As you guys know, sprints are usually about 2 weeks each. Oh, I keep saying 11-week sprint, excuse me. It's an 11 sprint schedule. That's what I'm messing up here. It's an 11 sprint schedule. Each sprint is 2 weeks each. That's 22 weeks. That takes me not only through Q1, but also through the end of Q2. That means that I had to then go and reevaluate the seasons of development that I had put down originally on my calendar. Originally, it was going to be Q1 is game design, Q2 is software app design, Q3 is game design, Q4 is software app design, right? But with this new refactoring, it's now changed such that my game design is taking up Q1 and Q2. So now I don't have a choice but to use Q3 and Q4 for my app design. So, of course, originally I was like, man, that's kind of a bummer. Like, I really wanted to try to make progress and show progress on each, project by quarter. But check this out. I recently logged in to my academic schedule because you guys know that I'm enrolled in a certificate program for programming languages. And I looked at my academic schedule because I'm always planning for like the present and the future, like the short term, medium term, and long term. And I was just reviewing my long term um, calendar. And I realized that actually it's better for me to start my app design in Q3. Why? Because Q3 for my academics brings me to the final two courses in my certificate program. The two courses are database fundamentals and management, I believe, and then my final programming capstone, which is like where I literally have to design and build an app based on everything I've learned about Python, security scripting, uh, Java, and then database stuff, right? At this point, I'm looking at my schedule and I'm like, oh, so are you saying that basically the app development that I would have started in Q3 is automatically going to double count for my academic projects in Q3 as well? Like I can literally develop the database for my app in the database class and I can develop the actual app itself and push out a version of that app, maybe even two versions of that app by the end of my capstone and submit version 3 or version 4 of my software app as my project capstone. Hello. So, in so many ways, me having to refactor my entire development season allowed me to introduce even less friction right? And more harmony into my schedule as a developer and as a designer. Because if I started app development in Q2, I would still be smack in the middle of my certificate program, still trying to figure out how to program this, how to do that, how to do that. And I wouldn't have as much harmony between me trying to develop my app and me trying to learn how to actually develop an app, right? But by the time I get to start developing my app or continue developing my app, because I released versions 1 and 2 last year already, but by the time I get to like superpower the development of my app in Q3, I already have a good 6 months plus of skills and practice and different perspectives and coding and all these other skills that I wouldn't have had I not just refactored and reorganized my schedule. So by the time I develop my app, I'll have more knowledge, more practice, more experience. I'll know better what I'm doing. I would have tested out my knowledge on smaller programs. Okay. I would have done a deep, deep dive and analysis of all the things I need to do for this app that's coming. And once I start designing versions 3 and 4 of the app, I can use that design to and submit it to my capstone class and get my degree. So that is the universe basically saying, I see you, sis. I got you. You're going to be supported and you're going to still get to do all the things you want to do, right? As long as you're committed, you're consistent, and you're flexible. The goal hasn't changed. The milestones haven't changed. It's just the way I'm going about them has changed. And it just so happened that it worked out for the best. So that is my little woo woo ultimate lesson for you guys today. Those are the 4 different productivity tools that are super underrated in the world of engineering. And I hope that you guys found that super helpful. So, as you can tell, we're coming to the end of the podcast, but as per usual, we're going to first, before we go, engage in the Scrum solo. Ba 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 da 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 da. Welcome to the Scrum Solo for February 1st. So this is actually going to cover what I got done in the past 2 weeks, seeing that I missed out on the Scrum Solos for the past 2 weeks. So bear with me. So let's do a review. Despite my second illness, OMG, I made progress. So as I said before, I hit a world building milestone for the Sodom series by creating a great sports and athletics world in that series. I also finished weeks 3 and 4 of my object oriented programming class. And then I finished sprints 0 and 0.5 of my game design project. Retrospective, what slapped? Scoring an A in my OOP class, despite the fact that I was like barely hanging on. And also being able to refactor everything such that I still feel like all of my goals are on track and the journey is still worth it. What crashed? Duh, I did again, got sick and had to adjust again and rest. And girl, I'll be so happy winter is over because these colds have me in a chokehold. All right, plans. So what is coming up for this next week? Number 1, I'm going to finish sprint 1. Excuse me, that's actually wrong. I have to correct that. I'm going to start and engage in sprint 1 for my Roblox game. Sprint 1 won't actually be finished for the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to start sprint 1 and stay on sprint 1. Number 2, I'm going to finish week 5 of my classwork for object-oriented programming. And this is a big deal because this is the last week of that class. So I'm going to be so excited because I have learned so much and I'm going to continue to learn. Number 3, I'm going to go back and continue my deep study of object-oriented programming because you guys know I love to go deep with the concepts. I like to practice. I like to master them. And these 5-week classes are very compressed and very condensed. So I want to make sure that I am getting everything out of these classes that I need to get. And then finally for Sodom, now that I'm back on the horse, I would like to do less building, and more drafting. Or if I'm going to continue with the building, just still do more drafting. So those are my 4 goals for this week. The scrum. What were the constraints? The cold, as I said, took me out of play, but my solutions, of course, were to listen to my body, adjust and adopt a mentality of que sera, sera. Basically, what will be, and what was, and what is, right? So, and now we are going to start our sprint for the week. Woo! And so the quote that I am going to cling to this week is sort of similar to the quote from our last scrum, but it's a little bit different. It's still on self-care, and it's about self-care not being a self-indulgence. It is self-preservation by Audre Lorde. And I could not agree more. Again, I put it into my podcast as a productivity tool because without your health, without yourself, you don't have anything. So keep that in mind. So that's it, my Sables. I am going to peace out. But before I do, just a quick sneak peek of what's coming up next on the podcast. So it's the end of January. And even though I had 2 weeks of me just being laid out, I still got a whole lot done, and I still made a whole lot of progress on my journey, and I still learned a whole lot. So I'm going to actually do a monthly roundup if you're interested. It'll be like a little short mini episode of all the things that I was actually able to knock out of the park and accomplish, and the skills that I've been able to develop, touch, and expand in. So I'm super excited about that. But in the meantime, wishing you sable and stardust as we surf the singularity. This is Kobe R. Rice, signing off, logging off for now. Bye.